Real quick, before we get to the video, I'm currently running a poll for a future video to see which FNAF games are the most and least popular in the community, as an update to one I made a while ago. So if you would like to take part, check out the link down in the description. Today we'll be diving into Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic and exploring various out-of-bounds areas in and around Murray's Costume Manor. So sit back, smack that like button below, it's time to check out some Secret of the Mimic Lost Bits. Alright, so this game starts off with our Fazbear Entertainment technician protagonist, Arnold, driving up to the Murray's Costume Manor facility. And right away, even in this prologue cutscene map, we can already start finding some unused assets out of bounds. As if we zip the camera out into the void where the cutscene starts, we can actually find this pair of unused street sign objects. One smaller one, and then this larger one featuring 3 signs like something you'd see on the highway. And yeah, both of these seem to be the kind of signs that either tell you how far the next few towns or cities are, or which lanes to be in order to navigate to a given destination. So although I guess this one looks like it could be a billboard, I think it's kinda strange that the placeholder text here says, "Your ad can be placed here." The road that we drive on at the start of this game isn't big enough for a sign like this, but I think seeing a sign like this one indicating where we are could have been pretty neat. Anyways, after pulling up to the Murray's Costume Manor parking lot, we got a few things to explore here as well. For starters, one thing I definitely didn't notice on my first playthrough, and maybe you didn't either, is that further out in this parking lot is actually another Fazbear Entertainment van, suggesting, in addition to many other details in this game, that there were other Fazbear Entertainment technicians that were sent in here, but seemingly never made it out alive. Well, if we get ourselves out of bounds here, we can actually explore this area on foot and see that this van here not only doesn't have anything inside of it really, but it also has a severe lack of collision too, allowing us to casually just walk through it. Now, another thing you'll probably notice when you get here in the game is the large foreboding mansion off in the distance on the hill. Now, I was really hoping I could just walk up there if I skipped through this gate down here, but unfortunately, there's no collision for the ground past the gate, so I just fell through into the void below. But if we take the camera up to the mansion, we can get a much closer look at it in all of its low poly glory. And if you were wondering if there's anything inside, nope, nothing too crazy. What I did think was odd up here though is this massive broccoli looking tree to the left of the mansion. None of the other trees around here look like this and are instead fully modeled. But I'm guessing that this one might have specifically been used like this so it would cast a more prominent silhouette. But yeah, I just think it looks pretty weird up close. Now next, one comment I got a lot on my recent video covering the any % speedruns for this game is that if you clip through this door closest to you when you first exit the van, you'll actually load right into the burning retail area that's a few feet from the end of the game. Now this is honestly pretty crazy, and yeah, if someone can figure out a way to glitch through this door to get in here, the speedruns for this game will be probably less than a minute, which would be wild. And then lastly, before we head inside the facility, there were 2 interesting things I noticed on the exterior here. First, found on the roof near this large column thing is actually one of the pop gun blaster things seen in the shooting minigames throughout this game. And there actually seems to be a reason as to why this is here, but we'll get to that later. And then secondly, on some of the windows that I don't think you can normally see from the ground is oddly a 90-degree rotated view of the warehouse area in which roller skating Chica is seen in this game. And it actually continues onto the other side of the window too, which was pretty cool to see. And yeah, I just found it pretty odd that it was rotated like this. And now finally entering the facility, we start in the greeting room where we can see some mysterious object covered by this blue covering. And if you were curious if we can actually see what's underneath it, unfortunately it's a whole lot of nothing. Now a very memorable part of this game is of course the intro animatronic show. There's not a whole lot out of bounds here, but it was pretty interesting to see how Mr. Helpful emerges from the floor at the front here, as well as on the balcony, and then to see how Mrs. Helpful just flops over like this after the show is done out of view. Then, similar to the covered object earlier, I'm sure many players were wondering if there's anything inside of the mascot model seen throughout the facility here, and unfortunately, it's another no. Next, we chatted about the rotated window earlier, but throughout this game, we can see these graphics placed behind windows to give the illusion of seeing the area without actually having to load it in. Well, to my surprise, for the most part throughout this game, the areas seen in these two-dimensional graphics are actually accurate depictions of what's behind them. For example, just behind the security office is actually this warehouse area. This window does actually take you to the mail sorting room or whatever it is, and so on. I should also note that the levels aren't loaded in at the same time normally like this, hence why the devs added these graphics. But normally, there's just the dark void behind these windows, and you have to wait for the other map to load in. Now, this isn't true in every case in this game, but it does seem like, more often than not, if you encounter one of these graphics that give you the illusion of the other room being there, that's actually where it is in the layout of the map. Now, of course, the devs had to do this since areas further from the player have to be deloaded, and it would be way too hardware demanding to load everything at the same time, and it would only be attempted by someone crazy. But we'll come back to that later. Also, some of these graphics appear to be depicting the areas from an earlier point in this game's development. In the image we can see of the storage area, we can actually see the word preview mirrored on the floor here. And then, in this image of the mail sorting room, we can actually make out what looks to be one of the red and blue gift boxes that the player cranks open to get the various collectible items scattered around the facility. Now, there's no gift box here in the final version of this area, but it seemingly appearing in this depiction of it strongly seems to suggest that at one point in development, there originally once used to be. And speaking of Jackie, next up we get to Jackie's birthday showroom, where much like we saw with Boxy Boo in Project Playtime, here, Jackie is also just jammed inside of this gift box, looking hella uncomfortable, with the hat here doing a whole lot of shaking before the player opens up the box. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to be crammed in a box like this. Then in the next area, where the mimic controlling Jackie yeets Digityper here, if we take the camera back, we can see a clever little trick I guess the developers did, as even as Digityper gets thrown through the wall, the busted up model you see after you drop down is already loaded there, so we actually get to have double the digityping at once. Then in the lower level Jackie chase area where you drop to next, off in the distance we can see a large T-posing Jackie here. And I knew Jackie's arms were long, but wow, talk about wingspan. Then, not too far from here, you'll likely notice these large white objects, and these actually encase the one small upwards angled vent that you crawl through during the Jackie chase sequence. No other parts of this map use anything like this, and it almost appears like this was a very early modeling of the segment before the proper vent objects were implemented. Now next up, we get to this section where normally you have to fix this elevator to proceed. And one neat thing I found is that if you sequence break the game by going up to the second floor before you actually fix this elevator, if you take the elevator back down, you'll load in and float on the gear train below you, which I thought was pretty weird. You can't interact with any of the buttons here or anything like that, so if you do somehow manage to do this without hacking the game, you'll just end up getting stuck here. Next up, we have this super 70s looking showrooms area, and here we see this mysterious costume showcase that's covered up. And if you were curious, I'm gonna save you the suspense once again, as there's nothing interesting that the developers were hiding underneath here or anything. Then on to Big Top's showroom. Another thing I was curious about for this area during my first playthrough was what was behind these closed off doors. There are a bunch of other cool minigames here, so surely there must be— nope, it's a whole lot of nothing. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, it's not like the devs expected players to see back here, so why waste time adding anything in, but I don't know, I guess I'm always hoping for a little cine-like Easter egg or something. After this, we get to the segment where the player gets to the roof of Murray's Costume Manor, and we got a few objects loaded out of bounds that aren't normally visible to the player since it's so dark. First, we have not one, but two instances of some of the mannequins being loaded way off in the distance. There's one here, away from the front of the facility, just floating menacingly. And then there's another pair here doing whatever they're doing off in the distance to the left as soon as you get to the roof. Now, it's unclear why exactly either of these are here, but creepy floating mannequins on a dark, cold winter day definitely don't sign me up. And interestingly, also found off in the distance, pretty close to the two mannequins here, is the welcome lobby audio tape that you have to get from this room and plop into the machine by the elevator in order to get instructions on how to fix it. And it turns out that the reason why this is here is because this is actually where that one room loads in when you're inside of it. So I guess this object didn't deload along with the rest of the room. And this is the case for a lot of the objects found out of bounds actually. Now, some things like the mannequins here still are a mystery, but the blaster we saw earlier, yep, that's actually where Big Top's showroom is loaded later. Now, as a bit of an aside here, it's actually really cool to see how connected this game is. Like, if you load in every map at the same time, although it's incredibly difficult to run at any frame rate higher than a single digit, the way the facility was planned out and modeled is incredibly connected. Almost every time you see a door or window to an area like we touched on earlier, there's something on the other side that you'd expect to be there. The overhead doors near the start of the game, yep, just behind them is the loading area near the security office. Even the section towards the end of the game where you go up to Edwin's Manor actually takes place near the mansion model that you see on the hill near the start of the game. Now, this isn't true all of the time, as we'll see with some areas going forward, but numerous doors, even the ones that are blocked off, tend to lead to another associated room in the game. The developers definitely didn't have to do it like this, as if the player wasn't going out of bounds, they probably wouldn't know any better either way. But I just think this is a really cool detail, and I just wish I could have all of these maps loaded together at the same time without it basically melting my graphics card. And on that note, these two mannequins here, with everything loaded in, are actually right by a model of Jackie, the Mimic, or M2, this nice teal dev block, as well as a model of Big Top. And it appears that this is where the player is teleported to for Big Top's jump scare in this area. So just based on their proximity, I'm assuming this is also the case for Jackie and the Mimic here, and just speculating, but with how close the mannequins are, maybe there was once a mannequin jump scare too. Then back inside, during the chase sequence with Big Top, it was pretty creepy to see Big Top's head still snap to my location while the game was paused. Big Top's head moving around normally is creepy enough, but seeing it snap around like this was very unsettling. In the next area, we can see several instances of Big Top's central body section as well as an arm loaded just above the map out of view. And these are of course used for when Big Top slams his arm down in the various parts of the office-like area here. Then similarly, when we have to crawl through this ceiling part, just above is this grid section, which seems to have been used by the devs to map out where Big Top blocks the player or where the player can sneak by. And then just under this area is actually this red plane left over by the devs, and this indicates each square is 1 meter, so this was likely used for scaling object sizes in this area. Next up, we got this room near the theater section, and just outside of it we can actually find a surprisingly rare instance of developer text left over here, which reads, "Doll Hospital Start." Now, as loaded like this here, this doesn't mean much and could be open to speculation, but this was certainly a hint on where to start looking. And if you actually load in the hospital section, we'll see that the hospital area is indeed just below this. And this text isn't too far from where you do actually start in that area. And now moving all the way to the workshop area, there's not too much of note out of bounds here, except that I noticed that after I'd built the Pirate Captain Springlock suit, is that there's actually a duplicate model of it loaded just under the floor. And then after hopping on inside the suit and moving the camera back, we can see that the suit strikes like half a T-pose out of normal view, in addition to extending the cannon arm, as you can normally see in the game. Then getting to the stage area, if we zip the camera under the floor, we can see several objects from the Pirate Puppet Show section, including a bunch of the targets that pop up, as well as of course the characters too, like Foxy, Renard, and Kit, and then we can find Bossin just chilling here inside the ship as well. And interestingly, there's also a model of this Sea Star fella, seemingly meant for this show too, found way off in the distance here. Oh, also, if you were curious how the puppets work that pop up to block your view during the target shooting section, quite literally they just pop up with their stick and bounce around. No further explanation beyond that. Next, we move on to the repair area with Nurse Dolly. Aside from seeing one loaded way off in the distance T-posing, there's not too much out of bounds in this area, but what I thought was kind of funny was that even after the Mimic controlling Dolly falls into the melted scrap metal here, after checking to see what happens to the model, I actually noticed that the model of Dolly hunting the player in the previous area is still loaded up here, and still hunting. Then in the next area, inside the middle column here, we can find the melted model of Dolly T-posing in the middle of all of the melted metal. And then there are actually a total of 3 instances of a metal Dolly out of bounds here. This one, and then 2 more near the conveyor belt section ahead. Then also near this area where you have to sneak by Dolly before getting into the elevator, just under the floor here is this 2D animated texture of what looks to be a silhouette of Dolly with a melted metal animation or something. I tried playing through this part again normally to see if this gets used anywhere, but honestly, I couldn't see it pulled up anywhere at all. But based on where this is, I'm guessing this might have been planned to be seen through a window or something here to scare the player. And oddly enough, the same texture actually appears way up past the elevator shaft that you take to escape this area. And going off of what I said earlier about how a lot of the objects are loaded where they should be appearing in another area of the game, this one actually loads in the warehouse room, and yeah, this second one being here doesn't really solve any more of the mystery. And then lastly for this area, we of course have the elevator, and interestingly, it looks like the developers created the illusion of the player ascending in this elevator, as in reality, the player doesn't move at all during the elevator ride, and instead, the elevator shaft actually moves downwards to create this cool illusion, which is honestly pretty trippy to watch from a distance. And going back to the melty silhouette, this area up here is where the elevator shaft starts before it drops down. So maybe this one was related to that sequence in some way as well. Anyways, next up we move on to the warehouse area with roller skating Chica, and there's not too much around here, but what I did find interesting is that not far out of bounds here is actually an absolutely massive depiction of the security levels seen throughout this game on the Data Diver device that you use to access doors and computers throughout the facility. And yeah, not only do we have a massive version of the display here, but there's also another Data Diver floating as well. And honestly, I have no clue why this is here, or why it exists at all for that matter. There wasn't really anything of note that I could find in the admin wing and manager office area, but there is one painting here that, although you can partially see this normally, if you were wondering what this looks like in full, here you go. Yeah, it definitely doesn't seem to match the vibe of the rest of the facility and its art. And this same painting is actually reused in several areas, like here in the backstage section, it's copied like 3 times over in different sizes. And yeah, with how seemingly out of place this looks, I don't think it's too surprising that the developers seemingly angled these away from the player every time that they're used. Anyways, next up we get to the large dark room where you have to stay in the light to avoid the white tiger, and honestly, that was a bit hard to do when disabling lighting. Now I'm not exactly sure how the white tiger functions, and regardless of not being able to see where the lights were turning on, it seemed if I just kept an eye on the tiger, it wouldn't move, even from a greater distance. Anyways, I got a few comments over the last little bit with viewers expressing interest in how this place looks when it isn't incredibly dark. And honestly, this makes it way less terrifying. It just looks like a large, mostly empty parking lot. What I didn't notice on my first playthrough is that this first area actually has color-coded pillars going from yellow to blue to red, to I guess help the player see that they aren't backtracking to where they started. The next part also has this secret workshop area where I guess Edwin built the mimic, or mimics plural. And once again, there's a red covering here that looks quite mysterious. But you guys know the drill by this point. Unfortunately, there's nothing underneath yet again. So I guess the devs really just wanted the player to use their imagination for what's underneath the covering here. Then back to the main room. This time, it's not as open as the previous one, but it's still way less scary, and it's interesting to see all of the arrows that guide the player in this section. Especially towards the end of this area. Here there sure are a lot of them. And then here's one final sweep over the top of this area, in case you were curious how it all looks from a bird's eye point of view, which personally I thought was pretty cool. Now getting to the climax and ending of the game, well, what's deemed to be the true ending, I guess. There unfortunately wasn't much for the ride to the mansion on the hill, and despite how absolutely awesome I think the prototype Fazbear Pizzeria is, there wasn't much here either, aside from a bunch of security camera monitors found just underneath the Fiona room, which I guess might have been placeholders for the other monitors that are seen in that room. Then moving on to the mansion on the hill, or the Inventor House as it's listed in the files, there's again not too much here, but found way off in the distance is actually a duplicate of the Storytime pedestal thing that's used in the secret mimic ending of this game. So yeah, not too sure why there's one out here as well, even if there's one loaded in the room already. Next we get to the climax section where we escape the mimic, and it was cool to just kind of explore the areas down here that are normally blocked off by the prototype Trash and the Gang, or whatever they are. And similar to what we saw earlier, near the Mr. Helpful cart that we hop into to escape this section, out of bounds above here is actually another red dev block, this time much bigger than the one we saw earlier. And it seems like this one was used to measure the width of the gap for the archway below. Now at first, I thought that this area was a copy of the one that's used to get to the mansion, just with a bunch of the fire and debris added and such. But no, it actually turns out that despite looking like they're the same layout, they are actually two unique areas loaded in two different sections of the map. And then last up, we of course have the retail showcase room, and as we approach it, we can see all of the little animatronic fellas loaded in the void here, ready to start running around. Then, after exiting the ride, just like the underground section we just covered, the retail showcase area you can enter before the facility goes up in flames, and the one you go through just before the end of the game, are actually two different areas loaded in two different places. Now, what I thought was most interesting here is that behind this glass case is what looks to be a mini version of the gift box you opened earlier in the game where Jackie pops out of. And that's actually exactly what this is, as if we take the camera inside, we can again see Jackie squished in, shaky hat and all, albeit yeah, much smaller this time. This mini box also has a mini crank on it, so I was curious to see if I could crank this somehow, but when I tried deleting the glass surrounding this box, the game did not like it at all, and would soon crash after I got rid of it. But in the few seconds I had before the game crashed, I tried cranking the box open, but unfortunately to no avail. Now, one final thing I want to mention is that after trying to load all of the areas in at once again, near the area where Big Top makes the final appearance in this game as you descend on the large elevator thing, there's actually this model here, and this looks to be some sort of early untextured model of Big Top. I'll probably chat a bit more about this when I dive into this game's unused assets, but yeah, just thought this was super weird, and I wanted to share this with you all here first. Alright, so to kick things off, I was quite surprised when this game first launched and saw that it didn't release with a VR mode, considering that this game was initially revealed to be heavily developed for VR, and this was the only way that it was playable when I first got to play it at PAX West of 2024. Now, if you've played or even watched a playthrough of this game, you'll see it's quite obvious with how several interactable objects work that this was intended to work with VR. And although it didn't launch with it, the release build of Secret of the Mimic actually does have some leftover VR functionality, albeit pretty janky. You can't interact with most of the game's levers and buttons this way, and you can only play up to after Jackie's chase sequence, so yeah, it's quite unfinished as of the making of this video. Now, in an interview Dawko had with one of the devs, it was revealed that they prioritized flat mode for the game for release first, and according to him, the VR mode is still going to be released at some point in the future. Now next up, let's move on to some unused graphics, which Secret of the Mimic actually has quite a few of. For starters, another one of the many assets in this game that are left over from Security Breach is the graphic of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzaplex, and this was apparently used as a placeholder for Deckles in this game. Then, left over from another FNAF game developed by Steelwool Studios are the body, base color, normal, and occlusion roughness metallic textures for Bonnie all the way back from 2019's FNAF Help Wanted. Then we have this unused placeholder graphic, which, according to its file name, was used as a placeholder for a loading progress meter in the game's VR mode. There's this early version of the autosave indicator referred to as Flipbook. There's this alternate version of the Steelwool Studios logo seen when booting up the game, and then left over unused in the files of Secret of the Mimic here are a whole bunch of developer debug editor icons found in a directory titled Billboard Icons. And these include icons for interactables, checkpoints, mapping various things like a system floor, room, and zone, puzzle elements as well as a puzzle manager, an AI lake, starting and ending slides, this Eye of Sauron looking icon referred to as Look At. The Helpy icon is found here once again, but this time as an icon for a feature manager, a cinematic actor location icon, one for points of interest, and then lastly this monitor icon that appears much different in style than the rest of the monochromatic gradient icons here, and instead it appears as a placeholder looking graphic of a monitor. Now, I'm not sure why these are referred to as billboard icons, as the only billboards I recall seeing in this game were the ones found way out of bounds during the game's intro sequence that I covered in my last video, but if you have any ideas behind the naming here, I'd love to hear them down in the comments. And then lastly, for the unused graphics, at least on the 2D side of things, we have several left over associated with the terminals that you can access throughout the facility in this game. First, we have this placeholder icon of Freddy Fazbear himself, as he appears in the key art for the original Five Nights at Freddy's game. Now, based on the file name here, this icon seems to have been used as a placeholder for the item icon seen in the terminals. Then, sort of similar looking, next is this rather creepy looking sprite of what's apparently supposed to be Helpy's head. Now, although the file name for this guy mentions that it was meant to be used as an asset for the screens when the player has to control the crane to move objects around, based on some mock-up images made by Glenn Latier, the game's lead UI artist, it looks like this icon was planned to, at least at some point, have been seen in the top right side of the terminal screens where Helpy would have offered a little pep talk or reminder as to what the player's objective currently was. Then next, what I think is pretty cool is that there's a whole set of early security access level icons as they're seen in the bottom right of the terminal screens. Instead of a square, the first security level icon would have been a circle with a check mark, and interestingly, the early icon refers to this permission level as Visitor instead of Basic, as its final version is referred to. The security level icon was a shield instead of a diamond, and Repair had more of a diamond shape instead. Creator looked like a Wi-Fi icon. The inverted pyramid looking admin icon looked way different than its final counterpart. And then lastly, the executive icon had a star design instead of the bow tie looking design that's seen in the final version. Now, these early icons aren't even seen in a mock-up image made by the game's lead UI artist, so I'm assuming that these must have been made up in a much earlier point in this game's development. And then last up for the unused graphics related to the terminal is this mock-up image of a scrapped audio log inventory system, where the player would have been able to go back and not only listen to audio logs that they have found, but also read through the transcript. Now, unfortunately, in the final version of this game, this was of course cut, and the only way a player is able to re-listen to the audio logs is to actually go to the tape players themselves throughout the facility. And I think it's a shame that this idea for an audio log inventory screen like this was cut, as I think having access to them all in a central place like this would have been very handy for the player to play them back to their heart's content. And then, although not left over in the game itself, Glenn Latier has also shared a mock-up of another scrapped inventory screen, this time for text logs that the player could collect. Yet another aspect of the game that never ended up getting implemented. It's unclear why these inventory screen ideas were cut, given that there seem to have been various ideas for them, but yeah, I think it's too bad. And before we go on, a quick shout out to my channel members like Frankie XXV or 25 and Havit1310. If you're enjoying the content and would like to help support me and the channel and get some extra channel benefits, check out the join button or the link in the description below. Now moving on to the 3D side of things, Secret of the Mimic also has a few models that go unused too. There's this early model of the storage unit that the data diver that you use to get around the facility connects to. It looks pretty similar to how it appears in the game, but the model is quite a bit more basic and the texture is slightly different. Next is this object referred to as a recycling cube, and this seems to be a placeholder for the trash cubes used in the section with Nurse Dolly. And yeah, it just appears as this cube with a bunch of these round things sticking out of it, which oddly enough are using the texture for the elephant mascot's clothing. Then some other placeholder models include this data diver port, these early arms for the protagonist that seem to just be a default Unreal Engine asset. There's this really basic low poly model of a joystick, and then we have cutouts for a seemingly scrapped character referred to here only as Barker, as well as one for Nurse Dolly. Now these last two models do appear to be used in the game, but they're just found hidden away in the corner of the workshop here, defaulting to just a wooden texture. And there's actually a bit more to this Dolly cutout too. First, if you watched my previous video covering this game, you might remember we actually saw the fiery silhouette out of bounds in the area where you sneak away from Dolly. Now this doesn't really answer why this is here under this floor or why it looks like this, but at least we can now confirm that this was indeed Dolly's silhouette. And to add to this, although seemingly not left over in the game itself, this cutout of Dolly seems to be modeled after this bit of concept art for her made by Secret of the Mimic's concept artist Sabine. And then yeah, I don't recall seeing any character named Barker in the game, and although I couldn't find a matching bit of concept art like we saw for the nurse, to me this looks like it may have been some sort of mouse or rat character with a cane. And then the cutout assets don't end there either, as there are actually a whopping 17 other cutouts, with all of them using concept art for their texture. Now not all of these are unused, as some can be found around the facility in this game, but some of them conveniently seem to always be tilted up against a wall, where the player can't normally really see most of the front. Going in order, there's a cutout of the elephant mascot, the jester, both textured, as well as an untextured headless one. Then you're gonna have to help me out with this one, cause I can't tell what animal this is supposed to be, like a monkey or something. Then next, there's a cutout of Hedgehog Hudgy, 3 cutouts of the frogs. There's a blue mycelium man, this upset Carter caterpillar, cutouts of the alligator and the bee, and then there's not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 4 different cutouts of an octopus. Like I said earlier, some of, if not most of these do seem to be used in the game, but I just thought it's interesting that they actually use concept art for them. And then I actually skipped over one more cutout, and it's this one of a rat-looking fella. And I don't know about you, but I'm betting my money on this being the same Barker character that we saw intended for the other cutout. Now, based on this rat's attire here and the pedestal that it's seen emerging from, I think it's highly likely that this character ended up being replaced by Mr. Helpful, at least in some areas. Now, I don't believe this character was actually called Barker, as a carnival barker is just what these fellas are known as. And if all of that wasn't enough for this rat character, there's even a fully complete model of it left over in the game, and it's simply referenced as Ringmaster Rat. But yeah, all in all, there seems to be a lot of mystery surrounding some of these cutouts, it seems. Then last up for the placeholder models, another thing I showcased in my previous video is this very early model of Big Top that I found out of bounds after loading in every single area in the game at once. Honestly, I think this model looks pretty funny, with the legs just being a bunch of rectangular prisms, the fancy mustache here, these awesome looking horns, and then just a bunch of smaller extremities coming out of the central box here. Still not sure why the model was found out of bounds there, but this is one of my favorite placeholder models that I've seen in a while. Then, interestingly, before it was changed to be called the Birthday Showroom, as it's seen in the game, based on the texture for this entrance arch, it was originally known as the Jackie Showroom instead. In fact, in the model for this arch, behind the birthday sign that was added to it, we can still see the shadow for where the Jackie text was going to be seen. Next up, interestingly, in a folder listed as DLC Props, are seemingly some extra mascot costume models of the bird, lion, as well as the elephant, separate from all the ones that are normally seen in the game. And this is no coincidence, as yep, these are actually all of the costumes that were seen at the ending of Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach Ruin, which ended up being a teaser for this game. So yeah, although they're cleaned up here and in different poses, I think this is no coincidence, and I think it's extra interesting that the folder here is referred to as DLC Props, suggesting that Secret of the Mimic might have originally been planned to be DLC for Ruin rather than a standalone game. And then, after the unused models, we also have a bunch of unused animations left over in this game. First up are a whole lot of early animations for Jackie with temp in their file names. These include an early animation of when Mimic first controls Jackie and enters the office room and destroys the digityper there, before here, awkwardly pulling away. There's an early jump scare animation, one for Jackie climbing up at the start of the hallway chase sequence, which is honestly pretty creepy looking with how the head doesn't move here. Then there's this animation referred to as a soft scare, which has Jackie dropping down and then pushing up into a compact form factor. We got this temp animation of Jackie pushing itself along in the hallway during the chase sequence. There are two more early hallway animations, one referred to as Fork L, and then this one is referred to as Fork R. There's this really short animation of Jackie pulling itself up, dropping down, which has Jackie looking really creepy. We got this really basic animation of Jackie pushing up and then sideways, with Jackie's head constantly just looking down. A pretty basic idle animation, and then Jackie just dropping down. Then for roller skating Chica, in addition to seeing the start of her second jump scare animation where we can see her emerge from the floor and her skates awkwardly flip over, there seems to be an unused animation for Chica busting out of the party crate. Now in the final game, Chica will emerge from the crate and shortly after start skating around the warehouse. But this crate entrance animation has Chica busting a move and clapping before then starting to skate. Now Chica does do a little dance every once in a while as she skates around, but it's quite different than how it's seen here. Then after this, we once again get to chat about the Ringmaster Rat, as there are 3 unused animations left over for this model too. Well, the first of these isn't much of an animation really, as this start pose animation just has the rat chilling under the podium thing. After that is an animation listed as Intro, which has the rat emerging and then flipping around into several different poses. And I think this all but confirms that this Ringmaster Rat was indeed replaced by Mr. Helpful, at least in this room. as the animation here is pretty much the same as the one that Mr. Helpful is seen doing during the welcome show. And to only add to the supporting evidence, the third animation for the Ringmaster Rat is a looping animation of the animatronic being on a balcony, just like how Mr. Helpful is seen in the welcome show. So yeah, if you had any doubts before, I think this just about seals the deal. Then next up, there are a few unused video files left over in the game too, the first of which are the film reel videos seen in the inventor's house after you activate the parachute program. There's nothing too crazy about these aside from them lacking the filter as they're seen with in the game, and these videos actually have audio baked into them rather than using a separate audio file as the used versions do. And then the FazForce commercial from FNAF Help Wanted 2 is actually left over in this game as well, and this was apparently used as a placeholder for the videos played when plopping the film reels into the projectors. And now, last up for this video, after the absolute feast we got with FNAF games developed by Steelwool Studios in the past, I was pretty disappointed to see the extreme lack of unused maps in this game, as there's really only one left over in the game's files. And unfortunately squared, it's not even that interesting. This map is titled Act 1 Template Main Hallway, and it just seems to be an early blockout version of the main hallway area between the warehouse and workshop. Being an early map, there of course aren't many objects here, but oddly enough, there is actually a textureless model of the cardboard cutout of Bonnie that's seen in FNAF Help Wanted. Now trust me, I really wish there was more to say about this or any other unused rooms, but this is all we got, though I guess one is better than none. Alright, so for starters, there's actually a pre-release build of the game that was briefly available to those who pre-downloaded the game on PS5 before release and didn't download the launch day update. Now, unfortunately, the changes in this early build aren't nearly as numerous as we've seen in FNAF Into the Pit or other games that we've covered on this channel, but some of them are still pretty neat. First of all, the cube map seen in the room with Digityper appears to be an early unfinished one when we compare it to the one that is seen in the final game, as it has different lighting and lacks several objects, like the light bulb as well as Chica's box thing. And this cube map used here also appears to be the one that was used in a trailer for this game leading up to its release. And while we're talking about that trailer, in this same room we can actually see this gift box that was removed from this area in the final cut of the game. And this actually confirms my suspicions from my previous video where we saw the cube map of this office from the warehouse still showing this present, that it's modeled after an early version of that room that looks to be from around when this trailer was put together. And then there's another cube map of the warehouse that looks a bit further along than the previous one, but it's still lacking the light ball and Chica box. And similarly, a different cube map of the warehouse area can also be seen from the security office, and then there's yet another one in this build seen from the one office room near the showroom lobby, here showing off yet another perspective of the area where we can actually this time see the trolley elevator thing, though it appears to look different than how it's designed in the final version of the area. Now, oddly enough, this window here didn't actually get an updated cube map in the final build, but rather the developers just replaced it with a generic texture instead. It's kinda too bad too, as I think small details like this add a lot to fleshing out the facility here, as much like many areas we discussed back in my first video, the warehouse actually is seen just about like it is in this cube map beyond this window. And then, the cube map used in the vents during the segment where Jackie chases you is yet another early unfinished one, where we can see this what looks to be pig costume here that appears to have been one that was cut from the game or altered entirely, as it looks to be quite a bit different than the lasso pig models that are seen in the facility. Next, the Mr. Helpful model seen in the showroom lobby, as well as the one at the prize wheel in the Big Top showroom, actually lack any clothing besides the bow tie. And interestingly enough, this near-naked model is still left over in the files of the final cut of this game, despite never getting used anywhere. Then, while we're still close to the showrooms, there are actually quite a few more changes here than I expected to see from a build made about a month before release. As soon as you enter the area, this early build has this jester cutout, which was changed to a lion and sheep in the final cut. I guess the posters seen here in the final build weren't ready yet, as in their stead, we just see some generic art, gradients, more interesting designs, and interestingly enough, instead of the Fredbear Sing and Show sign we see in the final build here, this early version actually has what looks to be artwork from the Freddy and Friends On Tour cartoon. And I'm not much of a lore guy, but I'm assuming this was changed due to when this game takes place in the series timeline. Then later in this hallway, the elephant poster here was a Fredbear's Family Diner one. There's a hedgehog cutout here that was changed to the disco dancing dog. The monkey cutout here was changed to the jug band hippo one seen in the final build. And then interestingly, this early version doesn't have the Let's Play overhead doors leading to the birthday showroom. And instead, there's just this door here. And the door frame is still there in the final cut, but the door was removed, and we can't really see it from this gameplay, but the poster here looks to have been changed as well from some sort of bee poster I don't think I've ever seen before, to this birthday puppy one. Next up, it looks like Hedgehog Hudgy originally had a different name, as in this pre-release build, there are signs referring to him as Henry instead. Now, based on this being seen in this pre-release build, it seems like the decision to change the name might have been made much closer to release, as this build seems to be from May 16th of 2025, or just about a month before the initial release date of this game. And I'm willing to bet it was to avoid any sort of copyright issues with this VR short film that I've never heard of, which obviously features the titular hedgehog named Henry, or any of the other works featuring a hedgehog of the same name. Then in the theater area, a few changes can be seen with the crane puzzle there. First, the gift box on the left is seen here just chilling on the platform instead of being on a crate as it's seen in the final game. And then the UI on the monitor here is quite different too. The controls on the bottom are seen on the bottom right here, the tiles you can't hover over are solid instead of having lines going through them as is seen in the final, and the arrows indicating where you can enter and get off of the section are missing here too. And then to top it all off, it looks like the animations for Arnold's arm weren't finalized here, as his arm just kinda teleports in each direction, and I guess this was before the smooth moving animations that we see in the final build were added. We can also see how the film reel model, when placed into the inventory chute here, appears to be a little unfinished. And then moving on to the pirate puppet show, it too is, I guess unsurprisingly at this point, unfinished in this build. Mostly having some audio issues, like some dialogue not playing, or just getting cut off.
Hey man, groovy. Come on, lads! Oh, fuck.
Next up, in the employee break room found in the Storytime showroom, here we can again see a placeholder for the It's Bedtime poster that was eventually added there. And oddly enough, in this build, it looks like the floor here still wasn't properly textured, as it appears to be using the Unreal Engine default material. Now, another small difference in this pre-release build is actually seen in the pause menu, where what's behind the film is much more visible compared to how it appears in the final cut. And then on the audio side of things, first, when jump scaring the player in this build, the mascots actually use the Nightmare Staff Bot jump scare sound effect from FNAF Security Breach. Now, if you listened closely in Secret of the Mimic, you'll know that although the mascots no longer use this jump scare sound, Jackie actually still does. Next, the early build of the game actually has an area that was cut from release, and it's this section that seems to be associated with the Doll Hospital area, as well as the dark ride that goes through it. It's still left unfinished in this early build, but it's cool to get a look at it here. This seems to be an area where visitors would get on or off the ride, and we can actually see these electrifying posters on the wall here. And I remember seeing one of these near the end of the game where you get off the ride, so perhaps this might be where this room was to be seen. Here we can also see what looks to be an office room in the distance, but due to the unfinished nature of this area, unfortunately the map deloads in this footage here before we can get a better look at it. Seeing as how this area is here in this May 2025 build of the game, this was something that was removed within the final month before release date. And then last but definitely not least, this pre-release build actually has roller skating Chica making chicken noises. Well, at least it's a person trying to imitate a chicken that ends up sounding like the aliens from 1996's smash flop Mars Attacks. Anyways, yeah, that's mostly it for the differences seen in this pre-release build, at least the more major ones. Now, unfortunately, as of the making of this video, there hasn't been a way to dump this build to properly data mine it, but should that ever happen, and if anything else notable gets discovered, I'll be sure to cover it in one way or another. Now next up, just want to touch on a few things from my previous video. For starters, as many of you had pointed out, although I completely missed it, the Ringmaster Rat cutout and animatronic models are both actually found in the retail showroom area, so that's pretty cool. And then secondly, I keep getting comments about the Nurse Dolly cutout that we found out of bounds in part 1, mentioning that it's actually used when Dolly emerges from the furnace at the start of that section. Now, I believe the reason everyone believes this stems from Astral Spiff's Out of Bounds video on this game, where that's where he theorized that it was used, but this actually doesn't seem to be the case. I've replayed this section several times and have paused this animation numerous times, and yeah, this just ain't the same cutout. Here are both side by side so you can see that this actually isn't used there. The fiery silhouettes are found way later in this chase section, and they aren't ever used in that section either. Now next, interestingly enough, in a recent tweet made by Steelwool Studios celebrating those that got the Golden Hours Platinum Trophy, the background shown in the image is actually a room that's never seen in the game, at least not in the final cut. And also interestingly, we can actually see the Flower Fella cutout here, and this is actually one of the cutouts that I mentioned in my last video that uses placeholder art. And this is one of the ones that was seemingly scrapped from the game, as it's one that isn't seen anywhere in the final cut. In fact, its model entirely is missing in the release build. It's currently unclear where exactly this room was gonna be found, but it's pretty interesting, I think, that they'd use this as a background for this post. Then, in addition to all of the unused graphics we went over in my previous video, I also want to touch on a pair of unused cube map images that seem to be a leftover from the demo of this game that was playable at PAX West 2024. Both of these cube maps reference the warehouse area, and although they're incredibly dark by default, let's brighten them up so we can actually see what's going on. So first up is this image of the warehouse, and based on its positioning, I believe this is an early version of the cube map of the area that's seen from the security office. And yeah, as you can see, this reveals an early, much different design of the warehouse, with a different layout, no Chica's box in the middle, no trolley elevator thing, and we can see this creepy mascot costume chilling on the platform in the middle here, though I can't really make out which one it is. Well, at least not from this image, as this next one that's a shot from higher up in this room, it appears to show that this was actually the penguin costume on this platform. Now, although I did play it, I can't say I paid attention to what was used in the windows in the PAX demo, but apparently those that did remember this second cube map being used in this hallway leading up to the manager's office. Anyways, here we can again see the different warehouse design from a higher up view, and we can also see some bicycles that I don't think ever made it to the final version of this area, some smaller office rooms of some sort, as well as the textures on the windows here being all sorts of messed up, which I thought was pretty funny. It's unclear when exactly in development the warehouse was changed, but this room looks like it was pretty far along. And while on the topic of the cube maps, there's leftover coding in the game suggesting that at least some of them were once planned to be animated, with some believing it was likely going to involve the trolley elevator seen in the warehouse cube map. Next, let's move on to some audio stuff, first of which are a bunch of placeholder audio files. These include the alert sound effect that's a remnant from FNAF Security Breach. There's some basic radio static. There's an unused victory fanfare, which, based on its file name, was seemingly meant to play at the end of the Pirate Puppet Show. And then there are a bunch of placeholder voice lines for a bunch of the mascot characters that the Mimic uses to stalk you throughout the game. Now these are pretty interesting, as at first I thought that all of these voice clips were completely unused. I even made a video about it on my second channel, but a few viewers quickly corrected me that although it's incredibly hard to hear, some of these voice clips are actually used in the game. They're just slowed down beyond recognition. For example, here's one of the voice lines meant for the elephant.
I'm burning up.
And then here's what it sounds like when it's actually used in the game. I guess how it ended up being used is much creepier, but I don't know, I kinda wish all the different characters had goofy lines like this that the Mimic recalled from the past. Anyways, yeah, these aren't technically unused, but they're never heard normally like this, so here's the rest of these mascot voice clips.
Eek, a mouse. Now what was I looking for? I forget. Her. Dum-dee-dum-dee-dum-dee-dum. Shh, I smell something. Fee-fi, fo-diddly-fum. Warmer. Colder. I'm burning up. It's freezing. There you are. I'm gonna fall on you.
Then in addition to those, there are actually numerous cut voice lines for both the protagonist, Arnold, as well as Dispatch that reveal that the game's intro dialogue was going to be quite a bit different, including Arnold mentioning his wife leaving him actually having a shorter shift compared to what he mentions in the final game, and more. Anyways, here's the dialogue that shows how the intro was originally planned to play out.
Arnold, you there? Arnold, wake up. Wake up!
What?
Good morning, sleepyhead. Time for your next shift.
Next shift? I just finished a 14-hour shift 2 hours ago.
That's great. Glad you're taking some time for yourself. You deserve it. Now, listen, this next job is a little hush-hush, if you know what I mean, and we need you on it ASAP.
Hey, man, come on. I haven't been home in days.
Now, don't you worry. We've already informed your friends and family that you're going on vacation for a few weeks.
What family? My parents are dead. My wife left me last year. Oh, God, I haven't seen my kid for...
Awesome. Well done. Family's important to us here at Fazbear Entertainment. Now, here's the deal. We've done business with several trusted partners over the years. One of our most important is MCM, Murray's Costume Manor. The name is a little misleading. They created several suits and mascots for us, yes, but they also specialize in animatronic design and construction. As a Fazbear technician, you should be familiar with their work. Murray's been working on a custom endoskeleton for our new restaurant project. Everything was going great until... how do I put this? They ghosted us. We haven't heard from them in quite some time, so, of course, we were concerned about our investment. And the people. Them too, worried about the people. I'm sure they're fine. Now, they forced our hand. As per section 13.071 of their contract, they are in breach and have forfeited their rights to everything relating to the project. That's where you come in. Retrieve our property. Straightforward and simple. And as per section 9.041 of your contract, if you don't retrieve our property in a timely manner, you'll be fired and legally bound to reimburse us for all expenses, including your accrued income. Got it? Good.
Murray's is another 2-hour drive. I gotta pull over and take a nap or get some more coffee first.
Not to worry. Here's some company-approved music to keep you engaged while you drive.
Now, the intro section we did get in the final game is already pretty long as it is, but this cut dialogue is even longer. And although the scrapped dialogue fleshes out Arnold's character a bit more for us, I'm willing to bet that sheer length had a big part in why it was cut down. And I think the whole bit about Dispatch starting to play some company-approved music is kinda cool too, as it explains why the jammin' radio music kicks in after the dialogue ends in the final game.
Thanks for being a part of the Fazbear team. Dispatch out.
Now next up, I want to touch on a pair of voice clips that the Mimic repeats in the home towards the end of the game after you activate the parachute program. Now these are used by the Mimic, but what's interesting is that for some reason, there's no normal non-Mimic version of these clips, meaning that we never hear them in whatever their original context was planned to be. There's this clip for the Mimic mimicking Dispatch, mentioning ghosts,
Not ghosts. Ghosts don't exist.
and then one mimicking Captain Springlock.
Begone, boat hacker!
Now, before we go on, a quick shout out to my awesome channel members like Vincent and Easy for helping support me and the channel. If you would like to join the big club and get some extra channel perks, check out the join button or link in the description below. Then, although there aren't any audio recordings left over for them, moving on to some unused text stuff, there are several text strings left over in the game, some of which reveal even more unused bits of dialogue. For starters here, there are actually numerous cut lines from the stage pirate puppet show bit, where you have to shoot a bunch of targets while in the Captain Springlock suit, suggesting that it was originally planned to be a much longer play. First are some for Renard, the ship's cook, all unsurprisingly mentioning food. It's time for cake. No, not the fondue. No, not the tête de veau. The petit four. The croissant. And then, seemingly paying homage to the show Dexter's Lab, we got a scrapped line for Renard just saying omelette du fromage. Then next, we got a bunch for the Roxy puppet. Snack overboard. This better be important. Haha. Ahoy. Yar. Take that and that. Hiya. I've seen better. And then there's a subtitle string for when the player would shoot Roxy with Springlock's arm cannon, as well as her resulting reaction. How dare? How dare you? Why though? Then similarly, there are also a bunch for Rocktopus. Be cool, man. Chill out. Peace, man. I just go with the flow. What's your hang up? And lastly, don't be a downer. For Bossin, there are just subtitle strings for grumbling, cheering on the battle, fighting Rocktopus's tentacles, and ahoy, a yar, as well as Bossin saying, yes, you go enjoy that now. Then there's also a bunch for Puppet Foxy, including him saying, no, the perfect present. It be gone forever. Some swashbuckling sounds, another yar, ahoy, and getting shot string, as well as him laughing. And of course, we can't forget about the captain himself, for who we have a subtitle string for the begone boat hugger line that we went over the Mimic using earlier. Avast ye watery beatnik. Ahoy! Har har, walk the plank. The captain grumbling, take that and that. Fire in the hole, a hearty laugh, growling, as well as no parties. That's separate from the one that is used in the game. Now, the puppet show as it is quite long already, so I'm not all too surprised that a bunch of these lines ended up getting cut. Next, we can also find some cut lines for Nurse Dolly, including her saying, "Now don't go anywhere, I will be right back. Preparing for service. Hold tight. Almost ready. I'm on my way. And I'll be back as quick as you can say strawberry milkshake." Then next, we have a few unused lines for Edwin. Although Edwin can be heard saying,
"The MCM facility is temporarily closed."
there's actually a scrapped subtitle for the workshops being closed instead. And then, more interestingly, there's a scrapped line from the audio log in which Edwin proposes to Fiona, where, after popping the question,
"So, will you marry me? Please?"
he'd say, if yes, I have a ring I can give you later. It's somewhere around here," and leave a response at the end of the beep. How romantic. Then, although Fiona is heard reading the end of the story in the secret ending of the game, there are identical subtitles for Edwin reading it as well, suggesting that originally he would have been the one reading the end. And speaking of Fiona, there are actually quite a few more unused lines for her too, most for the secret ending story area, but also some that might have some deeper story implications. For starters, basically opposite of what we just covered, there's a subtitle for Fiona welcoming the user to the bedtime story and starting off the story instead of Edwin doing it as is heard in the game. And then there are several cut lines for Fiona's dialogue, including her saying she can't start the story without the bedtime boy, as well as various additional lines for her looking for David. And after these, we also have a bunch of scrapped lines for what could be a scrapped audio log, where things don't seem to be going so well between Fiona and Edwin. Here, Fiona would say, "Ed, I really don't want to leave things like this. I don't want to argue anymore. I made my decision and I have to go, just for a few days until the installation is finished. Don't be mad, we'll talk more when I'm back next week." So yeah, it looks like there was a rift between the two and Fiona ended up leaving Edwin for a while. And then lastly for Fiona, based on it being numerically the last lines for her character, there are some more lines that I'm speculating could be from maybe a scrapped ending. Here Fiona would simply say, "It knows what you want better than you do. It's always watching and learning." Yeah, quite the ominous bit of dialogue. Next, it looks like there are subtitles for Chica's scrapped chicken noises, as well as a subtitle for her expressing her hunger. And then there's a cut bit of dialogue for Dispatch, where he explains the reason he's able to contact you in the security office is because, apparently, Fazbear Entertainment has access to the facility's computer systems via their phone lines. And then, kind of the opposite, there are some bits of audio that are heard in the game, but their associated subtitle strings are, for whatever reason, not used. And this is notably noted in the Welcome Animatronic show, where there are subtitle strings for the animal chorus, but they're just never used there. And then, in addition to the unused dialogue text strings, there's also one for the Fall Fest ticket book that explicitly confirms that the event took place in the year 1970. And then, to top it all off, there's actually developer text left over that reveals some initial plans for a fourth ending that was cut from the game. Referred to simply as the redeemed ending, apparently the idea for this one was that the player would override the Mimic with Edwin's profile, which would then cause the Mimic to adopt Edwin's persona. After this, the game would end with the Mimic at Edwin's son David's grave, mourning his death. Now, personally, I feel pretty so-so about this ending, but I'm curious if you think this would have stood up to the other three endings that we do see in the game. Alright, so like I mentioned, there are various bits of concept art and UI mockups that were shared online by some of the artists that worked on Secret of the Mimic. I mentioned some of the UI mockups back in part 2 that were shared by lead UI artist Glenn Letier, but there are a few more that I want to touch on here. First up is an early mockup of the file select screen. At the top right here, it looks like there was planned to be a percentage indicating how much of the game was completed, and instead, in the final cut, this was just changed to indicate if a file had started a New Game Plus run. And also, the bottom of these cards were originally planned to show time worked, or how much game time was spent on a given file. This was ultimately never added to the final version of this menu, and the bottom just remains empty now. Then secondly, one small change can be seen in this mock-up of the map screen as it refers to the retail showroom as the costume shop. And interestingly enough, this is still what it's referred to as in the game's files. And while we're talking about the map, left over in the files of the game is this map outline of the first floor, and it actually has a few changes compared to how the map appears in the final cut, with some rooms having a different layout. I'll fade between the two layouts here so you can get a good look at which room layouts were changed. And then last up for the conceptual UI mockups here, there's also this one for the screen used for the crane terminals. Aside from the monitor itself looking a bit different, there's actually a few changes that were made here, most of which I covered in the last video when I chatted about the pre-release build, as the layout in this concept appears to more so resemble what was seen there with the placement of the control UI and the weighting graphic on the bottom left here. But in addition to those, another difference here is actually the inclusion of this single square unit that ended up getting cut from the final version of this loading bay crane puzzle here. Now, moving on to the concept art for this game, there was a bunch shared by the game's artists that give us a really cool look into the early design stage of this game, and some of them even reveal some ideas that never made it to fruition. First up, we got a few documents for conceptualizing Jackie, including various poses, designing her box, and then this document also shows off various images that were used as inspiration or a reference for various parts of Jackie. For example, we have these sequins for Jackie's hat, some wool pom-poms, this plastic or resin figure for the hands, as well as even a Ronald McDonald statue here. I suppose, unsurprisingly, makes an appearance. Next, there's some concept art for Captain Springlock, even showing how a human would fit inside the suit. There's also various design ideas for the Captain's arm cannon, all of which were seemingly passed on. Instead of the more basic one we ended up getting with the octopus on it, here we have one with some spiky bands and a skull and crossbones. Two different designs for one seemingly inspired by submarines, including this one that might have been a reference to a certain Beatles song about a submarine in a certain color in which we all live in apparently, one with an octopus tentacle motif, and then there's this one that's seemingly inspired by pirate treasure. And to add to those, before it was finalized to be an octopus, there are also a few concepts for which animal would be on the captain's shoulder, including a chameleon, a toucan, as well as two differently colored parrots. Next, there's a conceptual mock-up of the player's first-person view from inside Captain Springlock's suit, where this appears to perhaps be a render of some sort of early version of the admin wing of the facility. And it's kinda hard to tell, and I'm not sure if I'm going crazy, but to me, this definitely looks like a model of some mysterious A-posing person here. Kinda creepy, honestly. Next, we have some concept art for the pirate puppet show, including art of the puppets, some of which, like this chipmunk and bird, weren't added in the show. Boxy with and without a pirate costume, art of various props for the show, and then the sketch of the ship stage here seems to show an idea for a day-night switch in the play that didn't get implemented. Next up, we have a document for Nurse Dolly, and I already teased this one in my previous video, as it seems that this concept art of Dolly was used for the silhouette found out of bounds, as well as that one cutout in the workshop area. And here, we can also see a concept for how a person would fit inside the nurse costume, which is a bit strange, since I thought that these actually were supposed to be robots and not mascot suits worn by people. And then, of course, most interesting on this page, I think, is this alternate design of the nurse. Here, Dolly not only has a differently colored dress and shoes, but also blonde hair instead of black, some lightning bolts on her hand defib panel things, and interestingly, the spelling of her name is different between the two designs here, ending with either Y or IE, meaning that the spelling on this unused alternate design is the one that actually ended up getting chosen. Then after that, we also have some concept art for the nurse after she reaches temperatures higher than she was probably designed for. And here we can see this pretty unsettling art of her back, showing her backpack busted and parts of her hair burnt off, revealing her scalp underneath. Then we have some concept art of Big Top, as well as various different concepts for the admission tickets to the showroom. And then, interestingly enough, the art for the other assets in the Big Top showroom appear to reveal a station that was cut, one involving Mystic Hippo, where the player could have revealed their destiny. Now, there is one room that's sealed off in the showroom, and we explored it in my first video, showing that there's unfortunately nothing behind the closed doors, but I can only assume that this room was at one point planned to have been for this Mystic Hippo station. Then, related to Rocktopus and the Welcome Show, there are also drawings shared of various ideas for the crank mechanism for moving Rocktopus back to the starting position after the show malfunctions, and most of these appear to be a take on a ship wheel, and ultimately, none of these were chosen as it was made into a more basic crank design. Chica is up next, where we can once again see how a human would fit inside the suit, and then in addition to the roller skating cupcake animatronics we see in this game, this concept art also shows several other food fellas. And I think it's super cool that this concept art and these fellas are actually featured in the game, in the office room in the admin wing. Though, although the Burger Buddy is seen on some posters in that room, I believe that's the only one that's missing a cutout here. I think this is a really cool way to reuse concept art in a game that totally makes in-universe sense, and this is actually done on more than one occasion, like with this concept art of the alligator as well, and more. Then I mentioned the placeholder art of the mascots that ended up getting used for some of the cutouts seen in the game in my previous video, but here's another look at all the ones that were shared. And I mentioned this monkey fella, but there's also this wannabe plant boy flower guy here that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall seeing this art used anywhere in the game. Then we got some concept art of the animal decor seen in the secret bedroom in the inventor's house, and we also have an alternate design of the quilt seen on the wall where the animal panels were square and much smaller. And then there are also these hanging flags and banners here, neither of which ended up getting added into this room in the final game. Then next up, there's a document that was shared mostly featuring some artwork from FNAF Security Breach, and one featuring regular Freddy. And this actually appears to be concept art that was made for the video announcing Steelwool Studios event at PAX West 2024. And then, what I think is the most mysterious in this set of early concept art is this one for some sort of staging area that fell to complete ruin. Here we can see a power cable or something running in from the adjacent room that would seemingly lead to this lever, a pedestal with a big red button that would presumably activate whatever would be presented on stage here, and then we have some rather creepy looking cardboard cutouts of some animal characters that didn't make it into the final cut of this game. And these include this bird, what I think is a bear, as well as this stubby mouse guy. And then in the top left here, we also have this creepy happy mask that looks pretty unsettling. I guess we kinda got something similar to this in the R&D section towards the end of this game, but I think this artwork here just looks really cool. Now that's about it from what Sabine, the concept artist, had shared, but I think it's also interesting to note that based on the naming of what was uploaded, there appear to be several files that didn't get shared. Now, whether this is because the other documents contain content that Steelwool or Scott Cawthon don't want publicly seen, or they just weren't deemed super interesting or something, is unfortunately just left for us to speculate over. But in addition to the art that was shared by Sabine, there's also a whole bunch that was shared by another artist that worked on the game, Angel Manila. Now, for the most part here, the art is either the same as the objects are seen in the game, or at least they're very similar. But some concept highlights include different ideas for how the audio log players would work, including most of them seemingly being portable rather than wall-mounted as is seen in the game, several different concepts for how the tapes could look, various different designs for the computer terminals with some being taller than the rest here, We got concepts of the conduit puzzles as well as different ideas for how the pieces could look, some different ideas for the game's levers and cranks, there are different designs of the birthday puppy, some more concept art of the pirate captain, who interestingly here is referred to as Captain Cobalt, suggesting that that was originally the planned name for the character. And then there are some very cool concepts for some prototype spring-lock suits, as well as some for Bub and Monty, with Monty's featuring different designs for his head and hat. And then there's also a document featuring a bunch of different designs for the animatronic abomination known as M2RND. Instead of using the prototype pieces of the animatronics, as it's seen in the final game, the concepts here mostly use parts of the original animatronics as we saw them in FNAF 1. And here we can see various different configurations with different parts in different places, with some of the concepts here honestly looking like pure nightmare fuel. Like this would have been extremely terrifying to see. But ultimately, it looks like the large design here was the one that was chosen, though as you can see, all of the pieces got swapped out with the prototype equivalents. I guess it makes more sense this way given the context of where this is seen in the game, but what do you think? Do you like the prototype designs of M2, or would you have preferred the abomination to take on more of a FNAF 1 look? Then next, we got a pair of pages featuring several different concepts for the screen and lights on the data diver, as well as different ideas for the connectors. But what I think is extra interesting is that all of these concepts here feature sections on the data diver that never ended up getting added in the final design, where it would seemingly display that a new audio log was available. Now, I've talked about scrapped ideas for the audio logs to be playable outside of just their original players in my last video, and it seems like this supports that idea, where the audio logs would have seemingly have been saved to the data diver to be uploaded to the terminals, or perhaps even playable right from the unit. Oh yeah, and we also talked about some early security clearance icons back in part 2, and here we can again see some seemingly even earlier ones. These are just very basic shapes, so I'm pretty confident that these were just placeholders until the more finalized icons were designed. There's also this page for the data diver storage unit, and in addition to this art being actually what was used for the placeholder model we covered back in part 2, here we can see a concept for how Arnold was to wear the data diver, or maybe still does since we never normally see this, and we can also see the slots on the back of the device which would have been used to attach to the harness. And here we once again see another scrapped idea for a screen showing that an audio log was available, this time on a screen on top of the storage unit. And then last up, Angel also shared some concept environment art of a few different areas. One of an office room, a hallway, a sketch of some sort of costume assembly area, two concepts of a design room of sorts, both of which feature this wall-mounted unicorn head, which actually did end up making its way into the final game as it's seen in Edwin's office. And then last but not least, there's this concept art of what looks to be the birthday showroom area, which looks quite different than how it appears in the game, as here we can see a stage with a gift box, presumably where Jackie would still have appeared, as well as a split motif between space and a medieval one, as we can see an alien, a rocket ship, as well as a UFO on the left side, and then a castle, a sword and stone, and even a dragon on the right here. And I guess the more medieval style is what ended up getting chosen, though now that I think about it, not really sure how that relates to Jackie. I guess maybe aside from her being a jester or something. Regardless, I don't know about you guys, but I think I prefer the layout and style of what's seen in this concept art here over what we ended up getting for the birthday showroom in the final game. And now, last up for this video, in addition to all of this concept art here and everything I've covered in my previous videos, there's still more unused content I want to touch on. For starters, something I covered back in my first video were the billboard models that were found out of bounds in the driving map that's used in both the game's intro as well as ending. Well, it turns out that there actually was an intended purpose for these, which, according to a blueprint file associated with them, they were once planned to be used for the game's credits, presumably during the ending where Arnold drives away from the facility after giving the data diver to the Mimic. Next, I went over the cut idea to implement the Mystic Hippo section in the Big Top showroom, but it looks like there were 2 other minigame ideas that were cut as well. Left over in the game's coding are references to a Bonka Bunny minigame, as well as a Carousel Repair minigame too, both of which aren't seen in this game, but you may remember seeing these in another Steelwool Studios developed FNAF game, FNAF Help Wanted 2. So it seems in addition to the target shooting minigames, which Steelwool seems to really love, the Bonka Bunny and Carousel Repair minigames were also once planned to be brought back here in Secret of the Mimic in some capacity. But for one reason or another, they just weren't added, and instead we just got 2 target blasters in this showroom. And speaking of Steelwool Studios, they just can't seem to stop making posts containing unused content, as in addition to the post they made containing the unused room with the equally unused cutout I covered in my last video, they also recently made a post containing various character models, and among these are actually 2 normally unused models. We have the naked Mr. Helpful model only rocking his bow tie, which I covered in my last video here. And here we can also see this model of Kit, the one puppet from the pirate show, and this appears to be an early model of Kit, where the puppet can be seen wearing a different outfit, a dark green crossbody belt thing instead of the red sash or belt that can be seen in the final model. So yeah, it's kinda odd. And this just has me wondering what other unused content they'll include in their posts next. And then in my last video I mentioned how Hedgehog Hudgie used to be known as Henry. But there's actually yet another name that was considered and scrapped, as the hedgehog is also referred to as Harry in at least one of the files. And lastly, in addition to all of the unused and subtitle-less voice lines I covered in my last video, there's one more kind of funny one I want to touch on here, and it's another one for Nurse Dolly. So one of the lines she says in the game is,
"You need a lobotomy."
But there's a subtitle string for an alternate version of this line, where instead of her saying you need a lobotomy, she would have said robotomy instead. Now at first I thought this might have been a typo, but the R key is nowhere close to the L key, so this must have been intentional. And I think this would have been pretty funny to hear in the game, and it kinda makes sense I guess, since I believe the nurse is supposed to work on other animatronics.